Hi, grade 9s. We're back again. This is going to be our second video together. So this is going to be applicable for lesson 2. So you may want to open up your lesson 2 PowerPoint or lesson 2 notes just to follow along. And again, I don't want to make these necessarily mandatory for anybody, but if you do get something a little bit extra out of me doing these videos, then I hope that that does help. So again, we're going to open up section 1.2. This is going to be our lesson 2, and it's going to be on the biosphere and energy. And again, I'm highlighting that on this first slide, there is homework to do. Now, I'm aware that not everybody may have brought their textbook home over this break. In the event that you didn't, I will work towards getting a digital copy of the textbook available to you. I know that a lot of the publishers have made their textbooks public. I don't know that the publisher of our textbook has done that, but I will look into it over the weekend and try to work that out for you. But if you do have your textbook, or you know someone who has the textbook and they can take some pictures and text them to you, then that would be really, really helpful for you. Okay. So we're taking a look at the biosphere and energy, a little bit of a review. What does biosphere mean? Biosphere is life on our planet. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do when we talk about life on our planet is we're actually going to start by talking about the sun. Okay. And at the top of this slide, you'll see it's entitled chlorophyll and photosynthesis, which are long words, complicated words. But I'm going to start by talking about the sun, because the sun in our sky sends an enormous amount of energy towards Earth. And a small fraction of the energy from the sun that hits the Earth is used to power all the life on Earth. So all life on Earth really does begin with the sun. And the way this happens is it starts with plants who absorb that solar energy and they turn it into food. And that process is, of course, called photosynthesis. Now, in elementary school, you might have said that photosynthesis is plants turning light into food. And we need to deepen that definition a little bit, because what photosynthesis really does is it takes solar energy, light energy from the sun, and it turns it into chemical energy. Okay? And it does this through a very... And chlorophyll is something called a pigment. A pigment is anything that gives something color. And chlorophyll is the reason why most plants and their leaves are green. Okay? So chlorophyll is this pigment that allows plants to absorb light from the sun. Okay? In the process of photosynthesis, what happens? Carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen combine to form a very important molecule called glucose. And glucose is actually a type of sugar. During photosynthesis, okay, we produce sugar. And a sugar is a class of molecules called a carbohydrate, which I'm sure you've heard of before. Carbohydrates are something that we eat all the time. And there are lots of different types of carbohydrates, and they typically give us a lot of energy. They're our primary form of energy that we eat, okay? And carbohydrates are all made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, okay? Now, what plants do is they take water up in through their roots. They absorb carbon and oxygen through carbon dioxide gas they get just from the atmosphere. Now, all plants, you can't necessarily see them with your eyes, but all plants have holes in the leaves called stomata. And those stomata, they're like pores. You know, we have pores in our skin. Plants have these little tiny pores called stomata, and that allows them to absorb carbon dioxide gas, or let carbon dioxide gas in. Okay? And what the chlorophyll does is it uses the solar energy to rearrange the oxygen and carbon and hydrogen that it absorbs in carbon dioxide water to form those glucose molecules. Okay? And when it forms glucose, it also produces pure oxygen, O2 gas. Okay, so first thing you're going to notice on this slide is this molecule here. It's called glucose, and it's actually a ring. Okay, it's a ring of carbons. Okay, and if we look over here at this second picture, now this is a really complicated picture, and you don't need to know all of this picture, but I do want you to observe on the bottom of this leaf, the bottom of the leaf, that's where the stomata are. That's where the carbon dioxide enters, and that's where oxygen leaves. Okay? At the top, there's a waxy surface, and the waxy surface allows the flat top of the leaf to absorb the sunlight that it needs. Okay, so we're looking at the top of the leaf there where the sunlight is absorbed, and the bottom of the leaf that contains those pores called stomata that accept the carbon dioxide and release the oxygen. Okay, so what we're looking at here at the top of this slide is a very important equation, and it is the equation for photosynthesis. Photosynthesis requires two reactants, two starting materials, carbon dioxide and water. So carbon dioxide and water will react together in the presence of light energy to form our products, glucose and oxygen. Okay, and this diagram below, I don't want to get too into detail with this diagram below, but what you want to gather from this is what is absorbed in the plant and what is released by the plant. Okay, so what's absorbed by the plant? Well, the plant's going to absorb water, needs water, that's a reactant, and it's going to absorb carbon dioxide. And what's it going to release? Well, it's going to release oxygen. Okay, and it's also going to produce glucose. Now, the plant needs glucose because the plant needs energy to survive. So it needs that glucose so it can burn energy. But other organisms will eat the plant and absorb that glucose as well and use that glucose for energy. Okay. So photosynthesis is vital for life on this planet. In fact, all life on this planet is powered through photosynthesis. Okay, because photosynthesis produces glucose that supplies the plants with energy, and then anything that eats the plant, well, that gets energy too. Okay? Photosynthesis also acts as a filter. It ensures that oxygen keeps being added to the atmosphere, which is important because we all need to breathe. We call that process cellular respiration. Okay? So photosynthesis adds the oxygen. It also removes carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Okay? So we should start to see a pattern as we take a look at what cellular respiration is as to who's adding oxygen, who's taking away oxygen, who's adding carbon dioxide, who's taking away carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Okay, we're going to take a break from the chemical reactions for a second. We're going to talk about food chains. I'm sure you've heard the term food chain before. It's a step-by-step sequence that links organisms that feed on each other, starting with the food source and continuing with animals that eat the food source. And there are three basic parts to the food chain. There's primary producers, and those are organisms that undergo photosynthesis. Plants are an example, algae, plankton, those are other examples. Okay? Consumers, they're organisms that cannot make their own food and have to eat other things to get energy. And there's three categories. There's herbivores, those are plant eaters. There's carnivores, those eat other consumers, so they eat other animals. And there's omnivores, they can eat both. Human beings typically are omnivores, okay, because we're capable of eating both plants and animals. I know some people choose to be vegetarian, okay, they choose not to eat meat, but it's not about what you choose to eat, it's what you're capable of eating. And we're all capable of eating both plant matter and meat. The third type of organism is called a decomposer. And I mentioned this in the last video. Decomposers are like bacteria and fungi. And what they do is when something dies or when something excretes waste, okay, the bacteria and the fungi, they take the nutrients that are in those decaying bodies and wastes and they return them back to the abiotic parts of the ecosystem. So they'll take all the matter in something that's died and they'll return it back to the soil, for example. Okay. Now here's a new concept. It's called the trophic levels. So matter and energy are transferred between trophic levels within the biosphere. Trophic levels are categories of organisms defined by how the organism gains its energy. Okay, so that's what we have trophic levels for. They're categorizing organisms based on how they gain their energy. So we look at this diagram. The first trophic level, that's producers, because they get their energy from the sun and they produce their own food. Okay. The second trophic level, now here's where you have to be careful. The second trophic level consists of primary producers, herbivores that eat plants. Okay. The third trophic level are secondary consumers. See why that's confusing? Because the third level is secondary consumers. Those are carnivores. They eat herbivores. The fourth level is the tertiary consumers, the top carnivores. Okay, that's like us, because nothing eats us. Okay, we're the thing that doesn't get eaten. That's a top carnivore. Okay, and then at the bottom there's decomposers, and they tend to consume everything once it's already dead. Okay, so energy and matter move through these trophic levels. We have a special word, it's called biomass. Biomass is the total mass of living organisms in a defined group or area. So it's literally the mass of all the life living in a specific area. Okay, and we have estimates of the amount of biomass on the planet or the amount of biomass in North America. That is the cumulative total mass of all the living things. Okay, food pyramids show the energy that's stored in biomass at one trophic level as it moves to the next trophic level through a food chain. The amount of biomass decreases from one level to the next. Okay? There's a very important concept here. It's called trophic efficiency. And trophic efficiency is about paying attention to how much energy is transferred from one level to the next higher level on the pyramid, on the food pyramid. Okay. Trophic efficiency is never 100%. When you eat something, you never get 100% of the energy that was in the thing you ate. Okay. Because the organism that you ate had to use some energy at some point for their life functions. Okay. They also produce waste. So some of that energy is lost. Some of that biomass is lost. Okay. So we have the 10% rule. And that means that when you eat something, or when something eats something else, only 10% of the total energy or biomass will be transferred from one level to the next level up above. Okay. Now, there's a lot of reasons why this happens. Herbivores might not eat the entire plant. Okay. Not everything that's eaten is digested. Okay. When was the last time you guys had corn for dinner? And I'll leave it at that. Okay. Energy is lost from the bodies of organisms through heat. Okay. Just by carrying out the normal life functions that they would go through. So there's reasons why only 10% of energy is passed on. Okay. So here's our example. If we start at the bottom with grass, we'll say that the grass has 1,000 energy units. Now, there are units that we use to describe the amount of energy in food or in biomass. An example might be the calorie. We talk about calories, but we're not going to get into that because that's actually higher level chemistry and biology. We don't need to deal with that. All we need to do is recognize that only 10% of the energy is passed on. 1,000 energy unit. The jackrabbit above is going to consume the jackrabbit is going to consume the grass. When the jackrabbit consumes the grass, it will only receive 10% of the energy that is in that grass. So you take 1,000 energy units and calculator, you're going to go 1,000 times 10%. And the answer that you're going to get is 100 energy units. Okay? Then, when the weasel eats the jackrabbit, the weasel's only going to get 10% of the energy that the jackrabbit had. So you've got to do that math again. What's 10% of 100? Well, 100 times 10% on your calculator is going to be 10 energy units. So the weasel is only getting 10 energy units biting the jackrabbit. And then we go all the way to the top carnivore, the tertiary consumer. That owl is going to eat the weasel, and it's only going to get 10% of the weasel's energy. Okay? So what's 10% of 10? It's 1 energy unit. Okay? So what we notice because of this process is that the bottom of the food pyramid, the producers, okay, there's a lot of them. But as you move up the pyramid, you get fewer and fewer and fewer types of animals. Fewer carnivores exist than herbivores, and fewer herbivores exist than producers. So that's why we notice that the top of the pyramid is really, really thin. There's only a few great horned owls. There are lots of jackrabbits, but there are only very few great horned owls because they're top carnivores and they need to consume a lot of jackrabbits and a lot of weasels to get the energy that they need to survive because only 10% is passed on. Okay. Two concepts here, bioaccumulation and biomagnification. Okay. Bioaccumulation is a process in which materials like toxins are ingested at a greater rate than they are eliminated. Okay? And what we talk about is we want to really think about toxic chemicals here, because toxic chemicals are the ones that cause the most problems. Okay? So we're thinking about, in this example, monarch butterflies. As a caterpillar, it ingests poisons or toxins from a plant called the milkweed. Okay? The toxins get stuck in the butterfly, but they don't harm it. Okay? So as a caterpillar consumes a lot of toxin, those toxins stay within the caterpillar even when it turns into a butterfly. And they don't harm the butterfly. But if you eat the butterfly, then the toxins will harm you. Okay? In this example, bioaccumulation works to the advantage of the species because it ensures that that species is poisonous and nobody's going to want to eat it. Okay? Now, some of the toxins that we produce as pollution, they can be devastating to certain species because those species will consume those toxins and they're not able to eliminate those toxins because they're foreign substances. They're substances that they haven't evolved to be able to deal with. And so they accumulate in their bodies and cause serious harm to those animals or plants, species, fish, whatever. Okay? So there can be lots and lots of issues with our pollution and our toxins. Okay? So that's one good example of bioaccumulation. That's one way that nature has taken advantage of this process of bioaccumulation, that we take in something faster than we can eliminate it, and so we accumulate it in our bodies. And there's a negative example. Okay? Now, biomagnification is a little bit different. Biomagnification increases the concentration of a toxin as it moves from one trophic level to another. Okay? And our example is going to be DDT, which we already talked about. DDT stands for dichloryl diphenyl trichloroethane. Okay? DDT was a common insecticide used in North America. They used to put it on crops to make sure the bugs didn't eat them so they would grow and not get eaten by insects. Okay? Then what happened was that DDT would enter the environment through runoff, which we talked about in the last video. Rain would come down and wash that DDT away. Okay? At that point, the DDT was absorbed by algae. And then guess what happens? Microscopic organisms eat the algae. And then small fish eat those microscopic organisms. And at each level, the DDT concentrations increase. So there might be a little bit in the algae, a little bit more in the microscopic organisms, and a lot more in the fish. Okay. Then what would happen is birds would eat the fish, and birds would then accumulate a lot of this DDT in their systems, and they would have more in their systems than any other species because they would eat a lot of fish. Okay, and those birds' reproduction was affected. it impeded the reproduction of these particular birds that ate the fish, that ate the microorganisms, that ate the algae, that consumed the DDT. Okay. And in the 1970s, we banned DDT. Okay. And what ended up happening is those populations of birds, they began to increase because we eliminated the chemical that was getting in the way of their reproduction. Okay. Another example of biomagnification that you want to think about is in tuna. So if any of you like tuna or eat tuna, one thing that you have to be aware of is you shouldn't eat tuna more than once every 2 weeks. And the reason why you shouldn't eat tuna more than once every 2 weeks is due to the chemical mercury. Mercury is a heavy metal. It can be very toxic when you consume it. Okay? And the problem is tuna is a very big fish. It's much bigger than you think it is. So right now what you can do is pause the video, go to Google the size of a tuna. Take a look at some of those pictures. Tuna is a massive, massive fish. And we have a lot of heavy metal mercury that's leaked into our oceans that gets consumed by smaller fish, which are eaten by slightly bigger fish, which are then eaten by bigger fish, and then eventually eaten by tuna, which are much, much bigger than you think. You will be shocked when you Google that, how big tuna are. And so tuna tend to accumulate, or the amount of mercury is magnified within the systems of these tuna. So if we eat too much tuna, then we can increase the amount of mercury in our systems and cause some significant neurological problems. Okay, that's another reason why women who are pregnant are not supposed to eat sushi, because they are supposed to keep their mercury levels to a minimum, and tuna happens to be used in a lot of sushi. Okay. Here's another example: PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls. PCBs enter the air, water, and soil while they're being disposed of industries. It's a waste product, okay? And it also affects the reproduction of birds when it's at high enough concentrations, okay? It's a particular problem in the Great Lakes because the Great Lakes, for a long time, including Lake Ontario, had a lot of waste dumped in them. And again, same process. The PCB would end up in the water in what we would have called a safe concentration. But phytoplankton would magnify the amount of PCBs in their bodies by consuming the PCBs. And then zooplankton would eat the phytoplankton, and the amount of PCBs would increase. And then rainbow smelt would consume the zooplankton, and the concentration of PCBs within the rainbow smelt would become close to 1 part per million. And then trout would eat the smelt, and the concentration would be very high. And then eventually, herring gull, okay, what we would call a gull, think about them, they're similar to seagulls, would consume the trout, and then that amount of PCBs would be accumulated to even greater concentrations, to the point where their reproduction is affected, affecting their eggs, which have a very, very high concentration as well, since the egg came out of the bird. Okay? And I think that is about it for that presentation. So thank you for listening along. Hopefully, for those of you that are watching these videos, they are helpful to you. And of course, for the time being, please stay healthy, stay safe, and we'll see you again. Take care. Bye-bye.